Introductions, I'm going to call on Representative Moser.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am grateful that you are giving me this opportunity to introduce 25 RS 0047, an act concerning education relating to school attendance, including participation in certain learning experiences and agricultural activities as a valid excuse for absence from school.
Thank you very much. Is there any objection?
25 RS 0047.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Seeing no objection, we'll consider the bill introduced. Any other bill introductions? Seeing none, we will move on. We have a brief informational, I'm going to jump around the agenda just a little bit because I know that certain people are trying to be in more than one place at one time today. I'm going to go right to Ethan Spurlock with Spark Wheel, and they just want to give us a small update on what they're doing, and they are a fantastic program that I adore. So Ethan, please come on up.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Okay, and it will be short, so I appreciate the time and the opportunity. So Chairperson Estes and members of the committee, my name is Ethan Sperling, and I'm the Vice President of Policy and Government Relations for Spark Wheel, and I'm fortunate to be joined by my colleagues behind me and thankful for the opportunity to appear before the committee and discuss briefly the important work that Spark Wheel provides to students and schools, communities across the state. Spark Wheel is proud to be the largest provider of integrated student support services in Kansas and the Midwest. So in Kansas, we currently serve in 40 schools, including early childhood centers, elementary, middle, and high schools, and within the last couple of years now on the campus of Pittsburgh State University. Really a very nicely built out spectrum of students. Additionally, we serve students after their graduation and into their early years of adulthood. And the number of students, I said, is 22,000 currently. That number continues to grow. We are proud to do work in several Kansas communities, and those communities are very different in nature. So we're proud to serve in communities from the Topeka area to Pittsburgh to Dodge City, Garden City. Our bread and butter is really the rural communities. We offer a program that's tailored to fit and respects local communities, local control, but it's ready to serve wherever it can. Spark Wheel puts our staff inside schools, and we work alongside teachers and administrators to identify those most underserved students, and we help provide them with directly and connect them with resources that already exist to help them show up as the best versions of themselves, ready to be the best student they can be, ready to make it to graduation, and prepare them for strong futures as they integrate into their communities, give back to their communities, stay in their communities, and help stop that brain drain that we're seeing across the state. So our mission is to remove barriers, and I just provided a couple of examples of the ways that we do that. We provide a spectrum of services from academic support to role modeling. We help provide essential needs, which this time of the year can look like warm clothing drives. We partner with community partners to gather and distribute some of those. We have partnerships with churches, chambers of commerce, and we try not to duplicate those services, but rather work with those who already exist in those communities. So this is a very high-level introduction to Spark Wheel. We could talk about it all afternoon. In the testimony, I did list the website. It's sparkwheel.org, where there's all sorts of information. Happy to answer any questions if that's appropriate and there's time now, and if not, happy to answer any follow-up questions via email.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Ethan? And Ethan, I am so sorry. I think I mispronounced your last name.
That's okay. I found the podium.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Representative Pishney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. I've seen and heard the terminology Spark Wheel. I live in Garden City, but I don't know anything about it as far as structure and where it gets its funding and so forth. Can you just give us some of the basics about Spark Wheel from that standpoint?
Absolutely. So we put our staff, they're called student support coordinators, inside the school. Those are always local people. We're never going to bring in people to place inside the schools. Those are people that in Garden City, we're going to hire somebody from Garden City who knows the community, knows the district, has those relationships, and we're going to hire that person in consultation with the district. So we're going to narrow it down to a candidate, couple candidates, take them to either the building principal, superintendent, leadership with the school, and make sure they're not only a good fit for us, but also a good fit for them. So they work inside the schools, they really ingrain themselves in the culture of the schools, they are of the community. And then in terms of funding, it's a braided model, so you know, it may be 60-40 one year, 40-60 one year, about 50-50. We do public, we're publicly funded in some ways, DCF primarily, but we also have a fully built-out development team that identifies and pursues grants, private fundraising. It's a braided model of funding.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you.
Ranking Member Stogsdale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had a quick question. It said we work in several Kansas communities from Pittsburgh to Dodge City and Garden City and the Kansas City Metro. Do you have any specific school districts that you work with in the Kansas City Metro?
So I've got some colleagues behind me who are more familiar with the programmatic questions. I can't tell you those schools.
You may bring them up.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kelly Stanford. I'm the Chief Program Officer. We were in Kansas City, Kansas School District. They were paying for our services with ESSER dollars, and when their ESSER dollars sunset, they no longer had the ability to prioritize that investment. So we are not in a Kansas City Metro School District this year. The districts that we work in, we are heavily built out in Southeast Kansas, in school districts in size from Uniontown and Neodesha all the way up to Pittsburgh, Chanute, Parsons, Independence, and then Garden City, Dodge City, Lawrence, Topeka, Ottawa. You know, so we spread. We're not really in the South Central or the Northwest, but across, otherwise pretty spread across the state.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none. Ethan, I'm sorry. Representative Schmoy, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You guys are in Ottawa, and I know that you guys are doing good work in Ottawa. Now, I have personal affiliation with the team because when I was working in the elementary school in Ottawa with the life skills program, then they would come into our classroom often and help kids that needed a little extra. And so they did some remarkable things, whether it was providing snacks or whether it was making sure that kids had clean clothes and new shoes, and making sure that they were well outfitted to fit in with their peers. I also know that Sparkwheel, they go beyond that, and they really get to know the kid and the family and the situation. When Sparkwheel is operating in the schools, how much of that do you guys extend from the school building itself into the communities? Like, what does that look like on a regular basis?
That's a great question, and you provided some really great examples of some of the above and beyond work that we do. Kelly is also, you know, the Chief Program Officer, so she's more familiar with the program. I'd let her speak to that.
Kelly, you may speak.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So in Ottawa, we are at the middle school and high school. We don't have an elementary-based level program. We are very connected in the community and will, especially through families. So if we are serving families at the middle school and high school that have elementary age students, the family engagement and the outreach to those families then extends naturally to the elementary age students, you know, and the outreach that we do to the community in terms of service organizations and faith-based organizations, we become part of community-wide efforts to meet needs, often in schools where we don't currently have one of our programs operating.
Thank you very much, and thank you guys for what you do in communities, because there is a drastic high need, and I appreciate your guys' work.
Any further questions? Seeing none, Ethan, we'll let you off the hot seat. We appreciate all you guys do for Kansas and your entire team.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Before we move on to our next presentation, I just wanted to follow up a little bit on what I said about excused absences. The reason that that is important is it's a real courtesy to Representative Stogsdill and myself. We are the ones who have to arrange your substitutes when you're not here. It's appreciated, not a requirement, but deeply appreciated when you give us a 24-hour notice, because then there's other staff we're running to and saying, please do everything you can to find a substitute. And there are days in this building that it is so crazy that they are literally looking for every representative they can find from anywhere, and we make everything flow easier if we're able to do that. So if you don't let me know that you're going to be excused, if you let Representative Stogsdill know, that's going to be fine with me, but we both really need that information to make our lives work a little bit easier, so we appreciate that. And then we're going to move right on into Commissioner Watson from the Kansas Department of Education. We're having literacy this year. I've kind of explained that the regents and post-secondary have kind of their universe of things that they control. And if you read that bill that we've been referring to, you see there's a lot of cross-support and things going. And Dr. Watson has the Department of Education's lane that he's in and what they're doing. And then you also have individual school districts. We're going to hear from some of them. And to me, these three conversations are the foundation to where we move forward to what all do we do differently to help all these changes that we're trying to make happen more smoothly. And what haven't we thought about that it would be neat if the university could do X for a school district or so on. So Dr. Watson, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm going to turn the microphone over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think you said it well, so I'm done, right? That's all we need to do. Yes, appreciate that. You do have a handout in front of you that I'll reference throughout. It's a series of 3 different handouts in one package of just some of the work that we're doing. I send you well wishes from the State Board of Ed, and if I could have the PowerPoint called up, be great. Thanks. Great. So we just had a turnover of State Board members. And as I'm looking here, we have some returning members and we have some new members, so that always happens in every election cycle. We do have 3 new State Board members that took their seat in January, and we're excited to have them with us. You know, our vision is pretty ambitious, pretty simple, lead the world, really some metrics to that about the success of each student. So here's what we know. I'm going to tell you a lot of what we don't know today, and some of what we do know. We would like to have students have the skills that they can graduate high school and go on to be successful young adults. That's a pretty simple goal, right? What makes that up? Strong academics. We're here to talk about literacy today. Bring me back, we'll talk about STEM. Or we can talk about civics. We can talk about a lot of academics matter and a set of other skills that students have that the Kansas Chamber of Commerce would call employability skills. Oftentimes they're called soft skills. We call them social emotional skills. I want to take out the mental health of that for a second, but there are a whole host of skills we call Kansas CAN competencies. When those come together in any person at a high level, they tend to be really successful adults. When they're not present to some level, then there's odds of struggle. And so what we're trying to do is eliminate that. I want to start off with a short video that I've shared a few times. It's from an actor who's now deceased, Sidney Poitier, who is a really great actor. Some of you will remember much of his work from the 1960s and 1970s. And he gets interviewed by 60 Minutes in this video clip, and then we'll talk on the other side.
You couldn't read. You had a very thick Bahamian accent.
I did.
And you decide to try and become an actor?
I did.
Why did you go that route? It kind of makes no sense.
I had no way of knowing that there is a madness to what I'm trying to do.
After a disastrous audition with the American Negro Theater, where Poitier could barely read the script, an act of kindness at his job as a dishwasher changed his life.
One of the waiters, a Jewish guy, elderly man. I had a newspaper, and he walked over to me, and he looked at me, and he said, "What's new in the paper?" And I looked up at this man, and I said to him, "I can't tell you what's up in the paper." I said, "because I can't read very well." He said, "Let me ask you something. Would you like me to read with you?"
Wow.
I said to him, "Yes, if you like." Now let me tell you something. Every night. Every night. The place is closed. Everyone's gone. And he sat there with me. Week after week after week. I learned a lot. And then things began to happen.
Yeah, I'd say they did begin to happen for him. A highly successful career. So let's start with this premise. All of you are successful. You've been elected to these positions. You're held in high esteem in your communities. And some of you, many of you, learned to read at a young age extremely easy. I would be one of those. It came easy. I can remember sitting in, not so much in kindergarten, so that seemed to be a lot of milk and cookies and laying on a rug, but first grade, second grade, Miss Noble, Miss Platts. But I remember young people that didn't. Some of you may be those students too. And for literally over 100 years, we've been debating the best way to read and been looking at research about what's the best way to teach kids to read. And the people that have done that research have argued tooth and nail about that. That argument's pretty well over, at least for right now, but we know we'll get more information. But I'll take some of you down memory lane. Some of you will have to just endear me in this walk down memory lane because you're going to go, I have no idea what you're talking about, Randy. It's not my generation. Here's a reader that I grew up with called Dick and Jane. In the 1930s, Scott Forsman produced this series about suburban kids and about reading. And it was one of the predominant readers across the United States and certainly used at Garfield Elementary in Coffeyville, Kansas, when I was going to elementary school. And Dick and Jane was around until the late 1960s. So it was published from the 1930s through the late 1960s. Now, if you know about schools, though, you can stop production of a book, but if you're not going to have the money to adopt a new book, you may have been using that series well into the 70s and possibly in poor districts well into the 80s. So even though it was ceased in production in the late 60s. For those of you who don't know Dick and Jane, what an engaging story. I thought we would read together today. All right. See it go. Look, said Dick, see it go. See it go. Now, I just want to ask right there, what are we watching seeing it go? The airplane, Representative Huber. How do you know that? Thank you. How would we know that that's what we're talking about? Because you can see the illustration. There's some clues here to how we're teaching reading, right? Jane said, oh, look, see it go. See it go up. Up, up, said Sally. Go up, up, up. And what happened in this era, it was called the look-see method. We were memorizing sight words, and we were using the illustrations to help us with the context of the reading. And if you were a bright individual, but struggled to read, you could bluff your way through this system. And if you were learning to read naturally, which some of the theory around this time was like language, every kid, unless they're really developmentally delayed, learns to speak, right? That learning to read was a natural occurrence that would occur if you read a lot to your kid and they were exposed to print. What we found out is that some students who appeared to be doing well when they got to be in 4th grade or 5th grade or 6th grade, all of a sudden were collapsing because they couldn't read very well. And now the volume of reading had gotten large, and homework, and parents were coming up going, when I was superintendent, Randy, I don't think my kid can read. I don't think they can read. They're spending hours on homework. They're in tears. This is in middle school by now, right? Upper elementary. And, you know, what we found out is a variety of students did not learn to read in this method. They needed some phonics. Now, this would lead credence to what would be called whole language. And then in the 1990s, we created a system called balanced literacy, where many of these components stayed in place, but we said, no, there needs to be some phonics taught here. And then it was. And that was predominantly the way that we were trained. And when I say we, educators were trained in balanced literacy. And finally, in the 90s, going into early 2000s, the two reading associations, the federal government commissioned a study, the National Reading Council panel released their results and said, there is a best way to learn to read. There are other ways, and a lot of young people will learn to read in what appears to be a fairly natural occurrence, but it's a really complex occurrence in the brain. And what was interesting about why did it take so long is because the researchers, Reed, Lyon, and others at the National Institute of Health, were looking at brain imagery of what happened to they looked at 40,000 kids that could read, that couldn't read, and what was going on in the brain. Where did it transfer? What happened? What was going on? And then that body of research and researchers got together. And so the debate now is over. That not only do we have to teach phonics, they have to be explicit, meaning there has to be a system to that. We call that structured literacy, or the science of reading. And by the way, my guess is in 2050, 25 years from now, we'll have better science even yet, right? So Dick and Jane's no longer used, even though I would have told you, this is a great way to learn to read. I learned to read. I would have learned to read almost in any way because it came somewhat natural to me. So one of the things, as we started to see reading scores drop in Kansas, the state board said, well, first of all, we have to have high standards in ELA, mathematics, and science. So we have to establish really high standards of what we want. As we adopted, the state board, the science of reading, we had to redo some of those standards fairly recently in the last 5 years. And then we had to set cut scores for assessment. We have to measure it in some way. When we get to the measurement part is where I'm going to beg you to, let's look at the data and let's not misuse the data, because the data will tell us some things and it won't tell us everything. A test on any given day tells us some things, but it's not everything. And so that was the first thing that we did. And so we use state assessments, and so do you. And we look at state assessments to make some general judgments. But here's what the state assessments tell us. A student demonstrates, and then there's a blank, I'm going to use level 1, a limited ability to use and understand, in this case, reading, academic skills, and knowledge needed to graduate high school and go on to be a successful young adult. If I'm in level 1, I have a limited academic reading to do that. I'm going to show you some Kansas data that says that. When I get to level 4, I have an excellent reading ability, in this case, to go on and do that work well. Now, I may not show up to class. I may be a jerk, right? I may not know math, but in the area of reading, as we measured on the state assessment, that's what we're saying. Here's where we get into trouble. Is that student reading at grade level? We'll talk some about that. Is that proficient? Is a term that all of us have made up to try to delineate a level of reading, but it's not that simple. And when we look at a child, it's not that simple. So when we're really trying to give you the descriptors of what this means, and I'll illustrate that for those of you that are veterans on the committee, will have seen this chart in a different way. I'm just going to show you the English language arts today and not the mathematics or the science or the ACT scores. I'm just going to share with you state assessments. Oftentimes I'm asked, so Randy, we'll talk about Mississippi quite a bit today. What do you think about what's going on in Utah? A good friend of mine's commissioner and just announced her retirement. And I'm like, I don't know. I'm so worried about the kids of Kansas. This is my home state that, I'm interested if someone tells me. But when we look at data, we're informed by the national research, and then I want our researchers to do research on our kids and our families. This is over 106,000 Kansas students, and I'm going to share with you. It was done in the classes of 2017, 2018, and 2019. Now, why is that important? As I'm going to show you this data. 17, 18, 19. Pre-pandemic. Okay? This is not during the pandemic. This is pre-pandemic. The reason we're looking at these classes is that these are 10th graders when they took the state assessment, and then we followed them after high school to see what they did. Okay? I said to our researchers, where's the class of 2020? Madam Chair, they looked at me like, are you really asking me what happened? We didn't take the state assessment in 2020 because of the pandemic. So that's why we don't, but next year we will add the class of 21 to this data, and this number will go to about 135,000, 140,000 Kansas students. So here's what you're going to see. Level 1, 2, 3, and 4. 10th graders, 106,000 Kansas students that took that assessment. Representative Robert, you're going to say that's one test on one day, and it is. That's the limitation. Could a kid say, I'm not taking this serious, I'm filling in A, B, C, and yes. All that's taken into account, okay? Please know that. That's why we're looking at such a large data set. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, Level 4, then we ask this question, did you graduate from high school? Pretty simple. And look at the difference between those students who scored in Level 1 and those students that scored in Level 2. 81% of kids in Level 1 in the class of 17, 18, and 19 went on to graduate. 91, almost 92% if you were in Level 2 went on to graduate. Now what I can't say is that if we move every kid from Level 1 to 2, we're going to see this jump. What I'm telling you is we're looking at did they graduate and where were they when they scored? Our goal is 95% graduation. In Kansas in those 3 years, those students that scored in Level 3 and 4 graduated over 95% of the time. Those students in Level 1 were almost 15, 16% beyond that. Now, you know all the research about if you don't graduate high school in 2025, the economic outlook for you gets narrowed. Is it impossible? No, there's going to be great people that don't graduate from high school to go on and be successful. But the poverty level goes up for those individuals who are on more public assistance, and they tend to struggle more. So graduation high school is important. Now, the second part of our goal is to become successful young adults to pursue something post-secondary, a welding certificate, a CNA, an associate degree, a baccalaureate, master's, PhD. Let's look and see how kids did there. So now we're looking at the percent of kids that went on beyond high school to earn anything. Again, welding certificate. We need welders and plumbers and electricians. We're counting those. Associate degree from Highland Community College in business. A bachelor's degree in teaching. We need some of those. Or a law degree or a medical degree. We're counting everything. And again, our goal is 70%. Why? Because the economy of Kansas demands it. Economy of Kansas demands that 70% of our young people today have earned what we call 2 pieces of paper. So now we're looking at the skills that it's going to take on the academic reading side, and you can see that only 28% and 0.6% of kids in Level 1 went on to earn something beyond high school. Now, I could talk to you in depth around, well, that may seem high to you if they can't read very well. These kids may not be illiterate, as we like to think of the term in the old days, where, like Cindy, I pick up, I can't read at all. These kids may read, they don't read well enough to go on academically. So they're going to have to be in remedial courses if they're going to go on. They may not be able to read the automotive technical manual very well. And you can see with each level of reading how dramatically that opportunity goes up, or those kids did in there. I also want to share with you a striking statistic about these students. Those students in level 1, half of those kids were chronically absent in school. Half. What that means is half of those students in level 1 miss more than 10% of the days of school in a given year. So if you go to school 180 days, these kids miss more than 18. And I'm not talking about because they were on the FFA trip. I'm talking about they missed school. Kids in level 2, a third of those are chronically absent. Level 3, 14%. And our top academic students in reading, less than 4%. Coming to school matters. Coming to school matters. And then instruction once we're in school, and the right instruction, all that matters. So this chart, and I have one for math and one for science. Today we're just talking about literacy. So the question then becomes, as we look at this, Representative Estes and I have a lot of conversations about what do we do. We look at this and the state board looks at this, and what we can say is we want every one of our kids to be successful. So do the parents that send their kids to school. They want them to be successful. So when we look at this, we have to say, how do we raise reading achievement? Because our theory of action would say, if we can do that, that 81% gets closer to the 91 or 92. And that 10% difference is hundreds of kids a year to thousands of kids over several years. And the economic benefit to them and the economic benefit to our state just gets better. So I'm going to walk you through some of the things that we have done. First, taking you back to a committee and work. Representative Hubert would have been around at this time when we created a dyslexia task force between the legislature and the state board that was chaired by then the chair of the state board, Jim Porter. Out of that came distinct recommendations in 2019. I'll go over with you in just a second. You have some of those in front of you. We have the Kansas Education Framework for Literacy. You've never probably heard of that. There was no law passed on that. This is the state board saying this is the work we're going to do, and I'm going to explain much of that work to you. And then what you do know, which was passed last legislative session, the Kansas Blueprint for Literacy. All three of these are major components that work together. And we're proud to be working together with Dr. Lane and Kansas Board of Regents on the blueprint. So high level, you can get all this off our website, Dyslexia Handbook. You have a couple of handouts. One's called the Dyslexia Screening Protocol, and then the other are called the Dyslexia Modules. I'm not going to go over all this in detail with you, but let me just, again, give you a high-level view. This required every student in school to be screened to see if they had a reading issue 3 times a year starting in kindergarten. At the initial time all through high school. We've adopted that to look at some data that as they get older in high school, we may not screen 3 times a year if they've shown to do well and continue to do well, but that's what it meant. It also meant that every educator had to go through training to recognize what to do with that screening data, that assessment data to screen. Now, all this would say, Representative Stockstill, this screener may indicate you have an issue. Doesn't tell what we're going to do. It just may indicate that there may be an issue. Then we have to deliver, right, on that. And it may be, again, as we talked about, a test on one day. You know, you ever go to the doctor and have your blood pressure done and you say, my gosh, I usually doesn't run high. And then what do they say? Well, there's this phenomenon that when you go in and get nervous, that sometimes your blood pressure goes up. So they want you to monitor that at several different times to make sure it's either high or not. So so the dyslexia handbook, this was the first work around dyslexia. 2 sessions ago, you put, with our support, dyslexia as a specific category within special education. So we're trying to help a broad sense of students that are struggling. Then we have what the state board said, we're going to put a focus on reading. We were fortunate. There's a lot of unfortunate things about COVID, a lot of unfortunate things. One of the fortunate things is that through the Trump administration and the Biden administration, both gave the state of Kansas some money to use to try to mitigate the effects of COVID. And the state board had some money allocated that they could direct. School districts had the major part of it. First of all, state board said, we're going to require all students leaving college or university to be prepared to teach in elementary school to have the science of reading courses in place, and they have to pass an exam on reading. Now, this has started during the early COVID, so this is about 21. Guess when that officially 100% took effect? Started in 21. September of 2024. Why? Because we had to change all of the we had to change all the standards. We had to get people that were in college at the time to get through the program of study that they had without changing that. We had to get to a new exam. We had to make sure, again, anyone in school at that time wasn't under the new rules. And so September 24, the exam's in place and all the standards are in place. So if I come out of Mid-American Nazarene or Kansas State or any of the universities that produce teachers in our state, they have to have required courses and required exam. I'll get to show you some of that exam. State board invested up to $25 million of federal money called ESSER, COVID relief money, to retrain all elementary teachers, administrators in science of reading. Why? Because the vast majority of teachers in our state and administrators, I'm one, we're trained in a different model. So that is ongoing, and Dr. Lane did a nice job of going through some of that data with you. They said an immediate stop to the practice of 3Qing. You don't have to be knowledgeable about the 3Qing because you just lived it in Dick and Jane when you said, what does the picture tell me? By the way, here's where it gets misused. Do we want to look at illustrations and photos? Yes, just not how to learn to read. Not how to look at that and then try to apply it to reading. So the 3Qing systems, said, what do you see? What's the context? What's the picture say? What are the clues? We now want students to go through a systematic way of decoding that so that they can spell better and that they have that. And finally, required all elementary level educators and administrators to demonstrate their knowledge of the science of reading by 2028 in order to renew their teaching license. And so that journey, that has begun. You have in your handout the entire kind of what I'm talking about, and plus more. This is the high level, but this is, the middle part of that. Dr. Lane went over with you what the blueprint is doing, especially at the higher education level. So when you get all three of those together, those are the type of things that we're talking about. So what are those requirements for veteran educators? If I have to have something different on my license by 2028, what is that? And how's that going to be about happening? Letters. So to give you an idea, here's what it looks like, by the way. If you want to take it, this is volume 1, volume 2. There's early childhood. If you're into teaching kids below the age of 5, it's only one book. So there we go. And if you're an administrator, it's only one book. I'm going through that right now. But this is what most teachers are going through in Kansas right now, called Letters. It was developed by a researcher named Louisa Moats. who struck a friendship in the 1990s with another researcher named Reed Lyon, who was doing the cognitive science research, and she said at some point to him, Reed, this is all really good. I know you're geeking out on all this. It's really good research. How in the world is a first grade teacher going to take this and implement a program? She developed one, and that's the program that we decided to use and pay for back at the time of the pandemic. Here's another one. I don't expect you to know these. These are companies that produce these, and Keys to Literacy. Now, that's the 3 approved by the state board right now. Any veteran teacher can participate in any of these. State board's paying for one of them, letters. So they're not paying for the other 2, but there's nothing wrong. We'll be adding more to this. As you heard Dr. Lane talk about, they're in the process of our universities and colleges of producing one. And I've gotten a couple other references from a couple of other Kansas companies that we'll be looking at also in order to possibly go on this path. That's one way. So you want to be relicensed? Go through a training program, pass it at 80%. There's a test, right? You got to show us. I was kidding Representative Hill earlier. It's called the Trust But Verify, right? Just don't tell me you learned it. We're going to, just like, and it's, by the way, it's what everyone goes through. Or you don't have to go through this. You can take the same exam given to students coming out of college. And we pay for that through the funds. So it's ETS, Education Testing Service. This is the actual test that now all students coming out of college are taking. You also, as a veteran teacher, could take the Pearson test, or you could take the Center for Effective Reading and Instruction test. All of those have been, again, approved by the state board. We will pay for this one time. So if you were on the Randy Watson theory of how many times can I take this and how, can I still get a grade, you're on your own after the first in terms of cost, but one time. So training or take an exam prior to 2028. We also said we're going to put some money into facilitators, reading coaches, if you would, and based upon the size of school district that you're in. Wichita, as you know, it's a different animal in Kansas. So we'd say we will train up to this amount, 24 trainers in Wichita. You can see if you're a district the size of 4,000 to 599, we'll give you 5 trainers. We will train those people in your district at no cost. So if they've done letters or they've already taken, we're now going to take them up a step. We're going to train them to be facilitators. Why is that important? Because guess what? Staff change. Committees change, staff change. So as people come in new, maybe from Missouri especially, we bring a lot of people across Missouri and Kansas, they can train. They also become then a cadre for us and our early and our literacy team, and they're able to provide professional development. We had our first cohort of our facilitators just graduate, if you would, and we're doing those in series of 25. Open to every school district, again, by size. Okay. Now, what are they learning? I'm going to give you just an overview, because here's what I hear a lot. Randy, this is just about phonics. No, it's not just about phonics. It is about phonics, but it's not just about phonics. Here's what we're learning, print concepts. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter. Those of you who have grandkids, your world gets a lot better, all right, right there, because you know what you have a lot of fun and then send them home with mom or dad. So my wife, who's an elementary teacher and principal, loves to do print concept. Let's read books, right? And she's looking at the book and looking at, hey, the words are making these sounds. And, that's where we're at right now, doing a little bit of phonological awareness. I didn't know when my mom was doing these silly nursery rhymes, and acting them out, how much she was, developing my oral language. And you can have early childhood people come in. Phonics, and then fluency. But look at those first 3, and look, this is Anita Archer's work, by the way. And you can clearly see that by about fourth grade, while we continue those for anyone that may be struggling, that starts to phase out. That's the formal instruction. And that's where many people stop. And that's where many people just teach phonics, everything will be great. We can get a kid maybe to levels 3 and 4, and then we watch them in middle school backslide. So while we have to get them there, we want to make sure we continue. So the other part of this is oral language vocabulary development. Representative Hubert, you and I have had a lot of conversations about meaningful background knowledge and topic knowledge around civics and some other things. You need to learn things to read later on. So that's why science and other literature and social studies become so important, because now you're learning about history. We just celebrated Martin Luther King's birthday. By reading about something at a high level, it helps with your knowledge. I need to know that, background knowledge. I was with some middle schoolers recently. I asked them, this is in one of our inner cities, where does food come from? Ask them middle school. What do you think they told me? Dillon's. Comes from Dillon's. Were they wrong? Had they ever been on a farm? That was their background knowledge. If I'm in that school, I've got to teach that. Does that make sense? I don't have that knowledge. If I give you a passage to read about farming, you might be able to read it, the words. You don't have any concept of that. And then that reading, listening, comprehension. So as we look at this, and we're going to look at a lot of scores over the years together, we're trying to get people that can read clear through young adulthood well. So yes, we want them at a certain place at 3rd and 4th grade, and we know the research around that, but we have to keep them there, and we have to develop them over that time. So we have produced a seal of literacy. You complete this work, we put a seal on your license. It's right there. Brand new. I think, Madam Chair, you guys are calling that a micro-credential. That term causes us some heartburn because of other micro-credentials, but that's a seal of literacy. All right? And to date, 2,649 educators have earned that. And we just started putting that on there just recently. So that's who's earned it, by testing, because guess what? 184 took the test. Most of those are coming out of college already, first semester, but some of those are veterans. Said, I know how to do this. I'm just going to take the test. Great. By the way, 90% of them passed that test. And if you want to know, if you design a test and 60% pass, you know, as an instructor, I'd be thinking, I may not have done a very good job of teaching that. If everyone passes, maybe it's not rigorous enough. I kind of like that 90%. That's about 9% higher than the national average. But as that number grows, it may come closer to that. We'll have to see. If it's over 80%, I feel pretty good about that, right, about the instruction going on. And I mentioned the work that Dr. Lane is doing. I think we have a strategic planning session this Friday. We're working really hard with our friends at the Board of Regents because we all have to be in the same position doing this work together. So, Madam Chair, you're going to say, show me the data, Randy. What's the results? Okay? Ready to show you this. And then I'm ready to show you what may still frustrate you. So I'm going to have you look at state assessment. Some educators will get on you about putting too much focus on a state assessment. I will tell you, in the No Child Left Behind era, we did just that. We chased a test score. We didn't chase the real learning, the real learning. We were chasing a test score. We're not going to do that again, but we are going to chase what this represents. What do we want? We want level 1 to come down, right? The number of students in level, and we want levels 3 and 4 to go up because we think it tilts the odds for kids. So I'm going to show you grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10 combined. I'll show you combined. 2022, a third of our kids, almost 34% were in level 1. And about a third of our kids were in level 3 and 4. We're getting kind of close to a bell-shaped curve here, which we don't want to see after treatment. And your community may be higher or lower. All right, this is state average. Last year, that number dropped slightly in level 1, went up slightly in 3 and 4, and this past year, it did the same. We've seen a slight decrease, about a 3% in level 1, and about a 5% increase in levels 3 and 4. Now, if this doesn't make you a little anxious of why we're not seeing faster results, then you're not human, because we want it. But I want you to remember, 2,600 educators just got the seal of literacy on their license. Just got it. All right? So we're talking about 18,000 or so educators in the elementary pre-K environment, about 2,600. And when we shared this chart with you a year ago, which is really hard to see, but you have it in a handout, our first cohort was in 2021. We said, year 1, this is what you're going to learn. Year 2, this is what you're going to learn. Then you're going to put it into practice in your classroom. And then by the 4th year, we should start seeing in that classroom some movement. First cohort, we should start to see that movement when? This testing cycle. This testing cycle. And will it move much? No. Because guess where our biggest cohorts are? In the fall of 24 and the spring of 25 in terms of the number of people signing up. And Representative Wynn may say, why didn't they sign up early? Because I don't think they thought we were serious. Till we said by 2028, you got to be trained. And then people, oh, okay, well, we better do this. I guess it's not going to go away. So after we train, this is where I want you to think about the next steps. And Madam Chair, I'm not going to offer recommendations today, but I'd be happy to come back tomorrow or next week and offer how we work together on this. We're training everyone in letters. That's a base knowledge, a little bit of application, and other programs. But then you have to adopt the right materials. The literature calls this is one of these acronyms in education, high quality instructional materials. It means not Dick and Jane. I mean, I'm just trying to tell you what it looks like. It means good curriculum materials. But Representative Getz, here's the problem. Dodge City may have just adopted something in 2020. It wasn't very good, and now we got to wait 7 years because they're on a cycle. So we're still caught in between this, but that's the next stage for the state board, is to move in this direction. And then we have to train people that now have the knowledge of how to teach it with those materials for 2 consecutive years to really start to move this needle. And finally, as you think about this, I think this is, you're getting a Randy chart. No research, all right, but how I think about building this. The foundation, we have to build the knowledge for everyone. I am taking letters. By the way, I got to Unit 2 yesterday, and it's all about reading. The first one was about how to administer, and I'm doing the administrative one. And it's hard. Like this is, the detail of it was really, really hard. So we have letters for early childhood, we have letters for elementary, letters for administrators. Any college professor, we will also pay to allow them to go through letters training in Kansas. Not if you live in Nebraska, I'm not paying for that. If you live in Kansas. But that's just the beginning, all right? We're getting to the beginning. I think when I come stand before you in January of 2026, that 18,000, we're going to be pretty close to having everyone now in that training cycle. We got to go beyond that. So we have to have now good instructional materials, high quality instructional materials. We need to coach those educators. That's part of that literacy cadre we talked about. We need other options from colleges to maybe micro-credential another tier, so I can be more than just the first stage. And then we know that that's going to take another 2nd year of that training with those materials. We need to coach again. And finally, we're going to need new reading specialists trained in this method. We're going to need new people with PhDs and master's degree. And you're getting kind of Randy's thinking about where we may go in the future just around that. Madam Chair, I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. And I apologize, I didn't realize, it took me a minute to realize you don't have the printout of the PowerPoint. It is on the S drive. If you look in the S drive for today's presentation, or with today's date, you'll see all of Commissioner Watson's things there. I'm going to open us up for questions. We do not have a lot of time, so I'm going to request, please get directly to your question and also kind of give me the glance before, for a head nod before you open a second one, because what you don't see is my list of who all is waiting to ask questions. And I am so grateful that by tradition, each person on my left and my right helps me spot. So spotters, please help me spot. Who would like to open us up with our first question? Chauncey, you may go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I guess we sat through Dr. Lane's presentation last week, and it was stated that our goal was by 2033 to have 90% of our students reading at level 2 or better. Does that correlate with what you guys are doing? And then with that being said, but just by your statistical data you had there, you show that like 54% of the people with level 2 will go on to pursue post-secondary education, but the demand in Kansas is 70%.
Correct.
So why are we not more ambitious in trying to set benchmarks sooner and try to accommodate that, say, 70% of our students are able to read at level 3 or above by 2033?
Excellent question. And that is still where we want to get. We want to get students to level 3 and 4. And so we're trying every day to teach at that level in instruction. But we have to move kids out of level 1. Our hair has to be out of fire about that first. And it's going to take us a while. So we ought to be teaching at 3 and 4. We ought to see that number go up like you saw. But we're also looking at level 1. I will say this kind of gets into percent and how many can read at grade level and level 2. I don't know what that number is going to be when we're really there. Whatever. Is it, you'll hear this, well, 95% of kids, if we do this right, can learn to read at grade level. I'm reading from the Reading League that says that's a myth. And this is in your packet. That's a myth. We know we can get more kids. If a third of them, can we lower that to 15%? Yes. So that's where that number of 90% came from. I hope that we can get there earlier, but it's going to get close to 2030 before we start to really see significant movement. And that's if we're all rowing in the same boat trying to do this work together. So we're not going to neglect 3 and 4. That's where we eventually want students to get to. But if you're in level 1, you're significantly apart from that.
Very quick.
Yeah, just real quick then on that. So basically what I was getting at though is, so basically with 7 years passing, if we implement a new literature, like say your example of Dodge City, then are we not leaving some kids behind and not pursuing to get them to that 70% in level 3 so they can be where they need to be get into the required workforce?
Well, we're doing everything we can to move every student to that level now. But as we think about a full state rollout, remember we have to almost retrain everyone to really do this work. You mentioned Dodge is doing a really good job of that, and then we have to get good materials in place because no one's using Dick and Jane anymore, but maybe. And unfortunately, while that's happening, we're not harming kids, but we're not doing everything we can to get every ounce out of that we can.
Well, and some might call that a harm. And just would kind of point out, I think districts can look at their textbook fund maybe if they need to replace antiquated or ineffective curriculum early. I think many districts do have some funds there because I think all of us really do want this to happen as quickly as possible. And in the doing everything we can, I think that definitely is the next conversation. What things that we're not doing, or sometimes we always say we wish we could stop the carousel and get things right and then restart the carousel. And I think we've gone past the time for that conversation on, do we retain kids? Do we do something different over summers? What is that intensive intervention look like? move forward. And I don't know if you want to address that tomorrow or the next time we have you in the hot seat.
I want to address a lot of that the next time, but I will say this. Time is what we all have, how we use that time. And you'll hear me say this in any group. If I want to do something well, it tends to take more time, not less. So if I'm 50% absent in level 1, I'm getting less time. If I'm going to school less, if I'm going to school 4 days a week and not 5, if I'm not using summer school, I'm not using my time as effectively as I can to help get kids to this high level. I think we can have a robust discussion about that.
That's what I'm most looking forward to. Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Watson, thanks for being here. With the chair's permission, I have 2 questions. One's very quick. Military and post-secondary success, do we have that in there yet?
I'm going to DC in March. My understanding is we will pilot that along with a few other states this next year, and by 2026, that's to be fully in place. So we're on the path.
Thanks for working on that. The second more difficult question, we have been struggling in this committee for, this is my 3rd year on it. We have a correlation problem between state assessment standards, these levels, these arbitrary levels of 1, 2, and 3, 4, and grade level. And one of the things that we as the legislature are under court order for, if you look at the Rose standards, is that we are supposed to have a funding to get children to grade level. And when I hear you talk here, a lot of times it kind of flips back and forth between grade level and between the standards. Is there any talk at the state board level of adjusting the 1, 2, 3, and 4 to something that is easier to understand for legislators? You know, we're not the smartest in the world. And so that we can look at that and say that's grade level and have confidence of that when we're funding for that grade level performance. Would you care to answer that?
Sure. And I'm going to answer it in a quote first, and then I'll get specifically to answer it. So this was a study that I was reading recently, and this is how this opened up. 2 out of 3 students in the United States are not proficient readers. That's how this article started. I was using NAEP, but 2 out of 3 students in the United States are not proficient readers. In that same paragraph, it says, recognizing that NAEP proficiency is not equivalent to grade level proficiency. But it was buried. What do you think people, so we use the word proficiency and grade level. It's grade level, every one of these questions on our exam is at grade level. We don't test below that grade level. We don't test above it. So right now, we're testing at that grade level and saying, but you're really low and limited at that grade level, or you're really doing well at that grade level. We are in the process of redoing literacy standards and assessments, and we'll do some correlation of that. I'm sure the state board will look at it, but it's one of those things that even if I say to you that's grade level, that's like, that it isn't going to tell you everything you need to know about where that student's going to need to be. We think if we can say, going back, Representative, to your comment, 3 and 4 looks like I can then go on to do anything that I want to do. And when I'm in 3rd grade, I don't know what I want to do. So if we're below that, we're starting to limit those options of those young people academically already. that when they get to high school, they won't have every option. So we will look at it, Representative Hill, and I look forward to having great conversations with you. But I don't want to give you a term that may give us a false sense of security, like proficient, and then we're saying, well, that proficient doesn't mean grade level on NAEP. So these are all terms that grade level means I can read that text around that standard at that grade level. And that could happen with a level 1 student. They just don't read it very well. So I don't know if I've given you the answer that you were looking for.
Well, not exactly, but kind of along with that, you made the statement about when we were looking at those test scores, you made this statement about a perfect bell curve or a nice bell curve. There's one exception to that. You put 3 and 4 together to get your bell curve, and you didn't tell us what percentage is in 4.
Oh, yes. And 4 is small. It equates to a 30 on the ACT out of a 36. So it's a very top end. And as you know, a bell-shaped curve is only representative of a random sample until you're treated, and then you should move away from a bell-shaped curve. So we should be moving kids to 3 and 4. But it's a very high level. As I started off by saying, we set a bar really high, you know, and so when you're comparing us to Oklahoma, and I don't know Oklahoma standards, but you can't compare states because everyone sets those scores and where they want to be at different levels. In fact, Oklahoma changed theirs and immediately had more kids proficient. Those are the type of things I'm not wanting to do. I'm trying to give you really good data, consistent data to say, are we moving the bar for our kids so that they have the opportunity to go do whatever they want to do?
I think and I'll shut up so somebody else can ask questions. I apologize, but I think the desire of a lot of legislators and perhaps the desire of a lot of people in popular press is to have a cut level, one cut level. Mm-hmm. And I understand the challenges with doing that because saying that someone is at this cut level is kind of scary, because if they really aren't at that cut level and you said they are, then you put it at the wrong place. And, you know,
right.
And I understand that's a challenging thing to do, but that seems to be through the years here, as we look at the court system and we look at the legislature, they're really wanting that cut score. That if you're above this score, we're doing a good job. If you're below this score, we need to work harder. And, you know, I understand the challenges with doing that, but I also understand that there is a wide number of people that want to see that number.
I think what I'm hearing is a request more than a question, and it's a fair request. So I'm going to move us on to Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Watson. I have a question on the delivery of letters and such. If I'm a teacher out here in the field, who's delivering letters to me? And then on the flip side, at the university level, is there some type of crossover partnering that to make sure that those candidates are getting the same training that the teachers are out in the field, that they are going to be applicable?
Let me answer the second part of your question. Yes, because their standards have to be the science of reading. So it may not be letters. Letters is the package that we use relative to the science of reading. But students in the universities, colleges now have courses aligned to the same standards of the science of reading. In terms of the delivery in the school districts, it's multiple. So if I'm in a mid-sized to a larger district, I may be training in-house because we have trainers that'll deliver that. If I'm in a smaller district, I may go to one of our service centers like SDAC or Greenbush, and we have trainers there. Or I may get together with another small district and a trainer may come out and train us. Or if there's a trainer next door, they may come out. So we've done all that. Some of the delivery is online, and then some of it is face-to-face. So there's a variety of ways in which you can get the letters training and educated. So while the letters, a university or college could choose to adopt that, they'd have to pay for that. This is a company, it's, you know, a for-profit company. But the concepts of the science of reading are in those university courses just like they are in letters.
Thank you. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randy, thank you for your presentation today. I truly appreciate it. I have a question regarding the teacher certifications and then the dyslexia tool. The teacher certification, if you are a teacher that was, you know, I went to Iowa State or wherever, and I'm coming to get a Kansas license, are they going to need this micro-credentialing? And if our teachers have to have the specific reading courses and pass an exam, are teachers from out of state needing to do the same?
So I have our Director of Licensure here with us, Shane Carter. Madam Chair, you mind if I bring him up?
Shane, you may come up.
He's going to help us with out-of-state rep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please state your name and your title for our assistant who is doing the minutes, make her life a little easier.
Okay, absolutely. Shane Carter, Director of Teacher Licensure, KSDE. And to answer your question, so literacy training, it's a national push. So a lot of states have already adopted the same training that Kansas has adopted. So when we have an out-of-state individual come in, we'll check to see if they've completed one of our state-approved trainings, if they've passed one of our state-approved exams, and if they have, then they'll receive that seal of literacy. But if they haven't, they'll have a certain amount of time to complete that training or pass the exam and earn that seal of literacy.
Okay, thank you so much for doing that. On the dyslexia screening, it seems like we're doing a lot of testing throughout the year, which takes a lot of time and takes kids out of the classroom. I have a child that's dyslexic and dysgraphic, and it was found really quick. And I don't understand why we're doing this multiple times a year, kids out of the class, when you said earlier by your evidence that, you know, being in the classroom is what leads to success. And so I feel like the benchmarks, we're going really slow.
Yes, Representative Steele, one of the challenges, just like Representative Hill brought up as we think about testing, is the more testing we do and the longer the test is, the more information I can tell you with certainty. But teachers rightfully say, oh, we're testing too much, I need to have instruction. And they argue for a shorter state assessment, they argue for shorter screeners. We do that because they've requested, but then we get more limited data. What I'd love to do, Madam Chair, is have a day or a partial day where Dr. Proctor and some of our staff come over and just lay out for you the testing protocols that we go through in depth, from screener data to interim assessments to mini tests, and then we can have this discussion when we look at it in its entirety. But you're right, there's always this balance of trying to ascertain how much assessment should we do to make sure we don't miss people, make sure we're monitoring growth versus instruction, which time is our commodity that we have to deal with.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Representative Hubert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Randy. I know we've tried, as the Board of Regents is identifying, you know, students that don't have the reading skills to succeed at college and providing the remedial to help them to do that, to try to provide that data back to the local school districts in regards to, do we have some school districts that are being very successful and not having a lot of students need that remedial versus are we identifying those schools that are not succeeding and saying, how can we help those schools that were showing a lot of students showing up at college with not the proper reading skills, and then helping that school to address it in a way where they drop their numbers individually as opposed to aggregate across the state?
Sure, great question. We certainly have school districts that do exceedingly well. I will tell you, if you again just look at the normal distribution of that, the higher your poverty is in generational poverty, you tend not to do as well as those that have low poverty, okay? That being said, we have some districts that are outliers to that are exceedingly doing well, where we would say, oh, it's surprising given your clientele that you're doing so well. So we do give that data. What I didn't talk to you about today is our whole accreditation system, which has structured literacy and standards alignment as core to it. And that's another discussion we'd love to have about how we're taking individual school districts through that process.
And I think for the Board of Regents and for you, that's one of the best ways we can improve the process by improving that kind of communication. So I hope we can continue to do more in that area. So
Thank you. And I find it helpful. I like that you've been breaking down things to high and low. And I think all of us are interested because every district, it's fair to say, is very different. But the movement, because did we at least move the low ones up to a high one and so on with each category? Representative Miller?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. It's great to see you again. I enjoyed our conversations last year about there seems to be a kind of a recurring struggle to understand the test score issue. And my question originally was the grade level question, which actually was answered a few minutes ago. But I guess my question would be more specifically about the level of clarification still necessary on what is considered satisfactory or not. Is that something, I mean, what is considered satisfactory according to that and the current way it's set up?
So, thank you, Representative Miller. Again, put the two of these together. Those are in any state, on any assessment, this includes NAEP, those are decisions made by adults as to where to draw the line, where to determine what we call that line. So, that will be determined by the state board and has been determined by the state board after they get a lot of input from teachers saying, when teachers get test items, and we're looking at test items, and they look and say, all right, a student at a particular grade should be able to answer this well, and then X amount of students don't, then they're recommending the state board along with our testing people where to draw that line. But I will just tell you, where to draw the line doesn't tell you everything. It tells you some things really well, but it doesn't tell you everything. And that's where we get in these terms of, well, that person's illiterate or that kid's failing. It doesn't tell you that. It doesn't tell you that. And that's what's really hard, because I want it to be simple too for you. It just isn't when you're talking about a number on one test on one day and then you're having to draw a line somewhere. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify what you just said about the NAEP, because I think people, and we have a lot of freshmen in the committee, get confused about the things that NAEP does. So NAEP evaluates our standards. That's kind of one area over here, and the other one is the testing. And states do not set their cut scores on the NAEP. NAEP sets universal cut scores. So just want to put that clarity there, and if we do get to come back and have a testing protocol, we can get deeper into that, because that's a common area where people get tripped up on the things that NAEP does.
So does ACT, SAT, any testing has strengths and limitations.
Yes, so we set our own cut scores on our own test, and NAEP sets theirs on theirs. Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Watson, for being here. My question is on recently arrived students that are ESOL eligible. I'm wondering, it talks about they are exempt from screening for 1 year, and then they get into the 3 times a year testing. From my understanding, though, if they come in with basic literacy of their native language and comprehension, depending on the skill of the ESL teacher to get them to understand all the words and the comprehension of English, that I could see where maybe 1 year might not be long enough to exempt them, but what are your thoughts on that?
You're correct. So let me tell you, the student in that category that struggles the most is that they have a language spoken at home, and they orally know that language. They don't know how to write it. They don't know how to read it. And so they come and they may not have any language, meaning they're interchanging, let's say, Spanish and English, and they're interchanging it, but they didn't attach to any one language. And so the first thing we're going to have to do is attach to one of the languages. And you're right. So a student is called an English language learner until they can take the test of the CELPA and pass out of that. And then they're removed from that, and then they go into the regular population. So we're looking at them having the skills to move out of that native language into our language, whatever that may be. We talk about challenges, all right? I was superintendent at McPherson, Kansas for a long time. We had English language learners, not very many, and they were primarily Hispanic. Go to Dodge City, go to Wyandotte High School, go to Wichita, where 100 different languages are spoken in any given day, and now we're juggling different dialects from Guatemalan. And so you're adding the complexities then. If I don't have a good reading base, writing base in that language, then there's a lot of work that has to be done for that individual. Representative Shriver.
You're welcome. Before we go to second questions, you said something that just shocked me in your PowerPoint. And how did we get to where our absenteeism is so high?
Remember, no, pre-COVID. Remember, that's why I said, remember those years I was showing you. Because COVID, it got worse. So pre-COVID, the average across the state was 14% chronic absenteeism. You saw in level 1, those kids are gone half the time. Now, those were 10th graders. So by that time, if you haven't been successful in school, maybe you're just not coming very often. But I will tell you, there's been a concerted effort by districts that were really high. Salina, Hayesville come to mind, that have done tremendous work in lowering that by working with parents. Because what happened in COVID is that here's what parents heard. Oh, my kid has the sniffles, I need to keep them home so that they don't spread something. And now, no, they need to be running a fever, right? If they're fever-free, send them. So we're re-educating back to that. We need kids in school. And then when they're there, we've got to do the appropriate things, but we need them in school. And it is shocking.
I am deeply concerned, and perhaps this is another hearing for another day, but how does any child in Kansas reach the point where they are having 50% absenteeism? You don't need to answer this now, but I'm warning you what I'm going to ask, because that is just, I think we have systems that are, or we think we have systems that are in place to prevent that from happening. And why aren't they working? What do we need to change?
I want to make sure that you're understanding that data. So 50% of those students were chronically absent, meaning half of the kids missed more than 10% of the days of school. So they weren't gone 50% of the time necessarily. They missed, again, if I'm going to school in Abilene 180 days, they missed more than 18 days of school that year.
Thank you for that clarification, because I was in error. But 18 days still seems like a lot for a child in Kansas to miss in school. We are close to the end, and Representative Pishney had another question. Was there somebody else who hasn't asked one yet? Okay, let me put Getz, Schmoy, and then Pishney and Brantley in. If we, oh, I'm sorry, Pishney has not had one. Representative Pishney, you're next.
Thank you, and part of the reason I didn't have one, because you've already addressed one of my questions pretty much with the different languages and the differences in districts that the chair referenced, because in Garden City, I think there's 23 to 25 languages in our high school. So, but the other question that I had is, and I asked this in a different context the other day, and I'm going to ask it about every time we meet. how do we reward the districts that are getting them from level 1 to level 3, level 4, and to hold them up as the standard rather than letting people be mediocre going forward? So how are we going to reward those districts, or what's the state board saying to the local districts with regard to?
So we have a recognition system, Representative, that does just that. So we recognize those districts that are doing extremely well in graduation and academic, in post-secondary success and other areas. And we acknowledge those districts publicly. We send them banners that they can hang in their building. Some of you may be going into gyms now, not just seeing state championship banners, but they can hang those banners. They have certificates. And I actually visit some of those communities that are at the very top, and we have massive celebrations of the work that they're doing.
Okay, and I'll just end by saying I'm a freshman on this committee, so some of the things are new to me, but I'm always interested in rewarding success. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Randy, for being here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Representative Getz?
Sorry, Representative Smoy, if I jumped ahead of you. I got on the list. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine is a question kind of around linking supports. There was things said about we can really show, you know, in a high poverty district that literacy scores are down. And so what has there been in the strategy of, and we heard from Sparkwheel this morning, a great support agency to help get kids to school, to solve some of the needs around the social issues that definitely apply to education and academic issues. What has the department done in the past to kind of target supports for those districts, or what would you be willing to do moving forward to up those supports for those districts to help kids read? I like you've said all day, there's a lot of components to this. That was just one that I thought of and wanted to check in with you.
So I'll answer that in 3 ways. The specific support that we give is through a technical assistance network that we call TASN for short. And those schools and those districts who are way underperforming, and a lot of that has to do with poverty or their conditions, we embed in those districts and those schools, and we offer support through that. That's 1. 2, we give that local school board extra money, or you give extra money in the form of at-risk funding to go specifically for that. That's another topic we could talk about. Are we being effective in that work? And then 3, when we distributed the ESSER COVID money, that formula went out where the more poverty you had, the more money you received directly through us. And then when we rolled out the letters initially back in 21, we targeted those schools that had been out the longest, and they were the largest that had the lowest test scores. So we brought the resources to them first.
If you, Madam Chair, just if you have any data on what those extra supports have been doing, I'll save it and let Representative get to her question, but if you have any of that, would love to see kind of some of the data of how it's working and what's not working.
Sure.
Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a really quick one. Are we seeing a correlation between more technology being used in the classroom and increased illiteracy?
So I'm going to answer that in multiple ways. The National Reading Panel actually looked at technology, and this is a while back, but they continue, and said, if I'm going to read on a tablet or a computer, there doesn't seem to be across the board, now there's particular kids, that works. The downside of this, and we just had a task force that some of you served on, is this thing called a phone is rarely used as a phone, as we would know it historically. We tend to check it 150 times a day. It's extremely distractive, and social media has a strong detriment to learning and the social development also, not just the academic side, of adolescents. And that's why the task force recommended that school districts not allow cell phones from bell to bell. That was their recommendation. And many school districts are looking at whether or not they're going to do that. But it does. And the Surgeon General just recently said young people probably should not have a smartphone as we know it until after the age of 16 because of that fact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've had great questions. We are out of time. So my last question for you, Dr. Watson, is would you be able to come back on Monday, the 27th, to finish questions? Because I know Representative Brantley had one, and I think the more questions we ask you, the more that we want to hear. And then we could also go ahead and do test protocol that day with you, if you guys would like to do that.
If you want me here, Madam Chair, I will be here.
Thank you very much. Committee, I'm going to point out for you, I'm going to point out for you that I did change the upcoming agenda for Thursday, the 23rd. We ran out of time before we got to the budget for Dr. Lane and the Literacy Task Force plan. We're going to have her back, give you a chance to ask those questions. Please come in prepared. I can tell y'all are reading your homework, and I love that as a teacher. Our last agenda item is approving the minutes that were mailed out with your daily agenda, and I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes. First by Representative Stogsdill, second by Representative Schreiber. Any discussion, any changes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. It sounded like it passed to me. Same sign for no? Okay, thank you all very much. I appreciate all of your hard work.